Hey, hello guys, welcome to Network Beats. So this is Tangadurai, and we have seen couple of videos about the BGP. So we have some good idea about some basic things about the BGP, but still there are a lot more to cover. So in last video we have seen that what is BGP and when to use BGP and what is IBGP, and also we have seen by pairing a neighborship between R6 and R2, right? Without configuring BGP on R1 and R7, we have tried pairing IBGP relationship with R2 and R6, and we have seen that BGP was coming up successfully, right? But since we are covering here BGP track, the best practice is to configure BGP everywhere, and let's see how does it behave, right? And what happens here is let's say we have configured BGP here and in router 6 and router 2, but we haven't configured on R1 and R7, right? So what happens, let's say that if R4 want to connect to any of the server connected to R3, and for time being you just think there is no direct link between R3 and R4, it has to go via AS500. Okay, so the traffic from R4 will come to R6, right, through BGP, and from R6 it has to either send it to R1 or R7, right? But here what happens is R1 and R7 does not know about what is happening over the BGP. Since we haven't enabled R1 and R7 does not have any idea about the routes whichever is being exchanged or learned via BGP unless that you have redistributed into the AS500 from R6 and R2, right? Otherwise your connectivity is not going to work until unless you are going to do the redistribution. So for time being I'm not going to do that because we have a lot of chapters to cover where the redistribution also get involved over there. And today we will just see how to form EBGP neighborship and how to configure that between R2 and R5. Okay, so then we will try to complete then by following that we'll try to configure we'll try configuring route reflectors configuration, and we will see what is multi-homing, and we will see what are the BGP attributes, and lot of things are coming up. So stay tuned. Now let's start with EBGP configuration. So in order to do that, let me go to the console. So here okay, so I think the IP addresses are already configured. So here we have to do just go to R2. These are the IP addresses that already I have configured. What I have to do, I have to configure EBGP between R2 and R5. In order to do that, configure terminal, router BGP, its local AS is 500, and there is always a good method. Okay, what you have to do is whenever you are going to configure anything, or it is not only for BGP, it is just for all the protocols, routing protocols, you just configure a router ID. Okay, because I'll just mention why it is very important. Because router ID plays a very good role in order to avoid some kind of loop prevention and a lot of things. Because if we don't mention the router ID manually, a router is going to pick automatically some other IP address as the router ID, and for that there is some criteria is there. How does it choose or elect a router ID? So in order to, let's say, how a router elect a router ID. So consider R2. Okay, there are physical interfaces gig2/03/0 and fast ethernet 0/0, and we will be configuring some IP address on these each interfaces, right? And if whichever the IP is the highest one, let's say, okay, here I have configured 27 network, here 12 network, 25 network. So by default 27 is the highest one, comparatively 12 and 25. So this will become a router ID, but the first priority is always go to a loopback IP address. Okay, if a loopback IP address is configured, okay, let's say I have configured loopback 0 on router 2, then loopback IP is preferred as a router ID. And once loopback is not configured, then your physical interfaces IP addresses will be coming into the picture. And also that means your interface should be up and active. Okay, that means what I say, it should be in up and up status. Your status and protocol status, sorry, status and protocol both should be up when you issue a command show IP interface brief. Okay, if it is either down down or up down, then this interface is not considered as a valid because it is not up, so that IP is not considered. Only the election will be happening between these two interfaces, right? Okay, what if the case I have multiple loopback IP addresses configured in my router? Okay, let's say I have configured loopback 0 and also I have configured loopback 5, then loopback 10. Among these three loopback IP addresses, whichever the IP is the highest one, then that IP will be considered as a router ID. So in order to avoid such things, so we don't want to do the things to happen automatically here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to manually say that this is the router ID for this particular router. Okay, that is better, right? So that is why hereafter whenever we are going to do it, we are going to configure the router ID on each router before doing any configuration. So here let me configure my loopback 0 as my router ID. Okay, so how to configure that? You have to type the command bgp router ID and give the IP address. It is basically ID, not IP. So just hit enter, that's it. So router 2 will be using 2.2.2.2 as a BGP router ID. So here, who is my neighbor? My neighbor is R5, and I'm going to form a neighborship over the physical interface, which is which the IP is 25.0.0.5, right? And my remote AS would be remote AS is something where my neighbor is located. So the remote AS would be AS35, right? Okay, and that's it. Okay, we don't want to do anything else over here. Let's go to R5 and do the same. And router BGP, here the local AS is 35 and BGP router ID would be, here I'm configuring its loopback 0 as its router ID, and here the neighbor is 25.0.0.0.2 and my neighbor remote AS is 500. Once you do that, your neighbor will be coming up. Let's say that. Okay, it is taking some time. Let's verify what it is. What's the problem here? See here, I haven't configured fast ethernet 0/0. That is why the issue is. So first we will configure that. Configure terminal interface fast ethernet 0/0 IP address 25.0.0.0.5, and my mask would be /24, and just make it no shut. Now our BGP should come up. what about R2? Do I have the configuration on interface? Yes. So I could see the BGP adjacencies up for the neighbor 25005. Let's verify that. Show IP BGP summary, right? So here I could see my neighbor 25005 from R2. The BGP version is 4 and my neighbor AS is 35. Number of messages received and sent, and the table version is 1. And I see some number under the column state or prefix received is 0, that is some number. So whichever the timer I see here, it is a up timer. If I don't see any number here, instead of number, if I see a idle active connect something else, then this timer is not a up timer, it is a down timer. That you should be remembering. So that's it. So what else we can verify with this? Okay, so you can type show IP BGP neighbor and you give the neighbor IP, hit enter. Okay, there are lots of detail about this neighbor, we don't need everything. Just say here your BGP neighbor and your remote AS is 35. There is something called external link, right? So this means this is a eBGP neighbor. Okay, if it is an internal link, that is called iBGP neighbor. Okay, and also you should see the BGP state is established. You guys know what is the BGP state. We have covered it nicely in our previous video. If you guys didn't watch that, please go and do watch those video because I have explained what BGP messages and states over there. And that's it. What is the whole timer, and what is the last read last write, and what is our hello timer, all these things that we can see here. Okay, so that's it about the eBGP neighbor, and stay tuned for the next videos. Thank you for watching. Bye.